came into the Foreign Service out of an academic background. I specialized in American Studies both as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student. And I had a wonderful opportunity. In 1975, I was able to get a Fulbright scholarship to teach overseas. And I wound up going to Spain, and I brushed up on my Spanish. And it was my first time overseas interacting with an embassy. It's very impressive when you go to an embassy for the first time, which is I did in Madrid for briefings. You see Marines in the embassy, and they are all so impressive and professional. And you get a sense of how an embassy works. You have people come from the econ political section, and they will brief you. They are people who are experts in knowing about what's happening in the country. You see the consular section. But anyway, I wound up teaching American Studies in Spain for a year. It was a dramatic year. It was the year that Francisco Franco, after being in power for almost 4 decades, died. So I saw lots of things happening. The country's moved towards democracy. It impressed me greatly, and I interacted with the Foreign Service people, and so when I came back, I took the Foreign Service test. And when I took that test, I focused on working as a public affairs professional because I'd come out of education, and what the public affairs section in an embassy does is it does educational exchanges, cultural programs, and also information. The press attaché and the public affairs officer are the people who usually work directly with the ambassador, or if you have high-level visits. So I came into the Foreign Service, and because I had good Spanish after my training, I started out in Latin America, and I was in Venezuela for a training program. First time I heard about International Visitor Program, and got to work on that a little bit, but also worked on press issues. I then went to Panama for a couple of years. I was a program officer there, set up all sorts of visits and specialists who came through to talk on U.S. education or democracy or business. And then I continued on. I was fortunate enough to go back to Spain for 4 years. 2 of those years I was director of a cultural center in Madrid, and we got to do all sorts of wonderful things. We had a library, we had monthly exhibits, we had speakers, we showed films. We interacted with Spain at that period as Spain was coming out of this period of dictatorship. And so we wanted to build ties with Spain, with this new generation of professionals. So after 2 years, they asked me to change jobs, and I became head of the International Visitor Program, as it was called. And that too was a wonderful experience because I got to meet a lot of these young people. And there are people who went on, to become cabinet ministers and very important people in Spain, also in regional governments. From Spain, went back to Washington. It was time for me to learn a new language, and I learned Romanian. And I went out again as a public affairs specialist to Bucharest, Romania for 3 years. And again, my focus there was running the International Visitor Program. It was a very large program. Similar to Spain, Romania had come out of a period of dictatorship, and we were looking to build ties. And so some of the things that I did, I felt, in that embassy were among the most important things. Reaching out to people in media, in education, talking about what we could do with them as partners. Because you always have to remember when you do these programs that we are not the model, we are not ideal, we are there to work with them, recognizing that their culture is different, that their institutions will be different. But how can we work with countries like Spain and the countries of Eastern Europe post-dictatorship? What can we share with them? So anyway, I went from there, back to Latin America. I changed jobs. I was a press attaché for 4 years at the U.S. Embassy in Santiago, Chile. Also a fledgling democracy, having emerged from the Pinochet dictatorship in those years. I got to meet President Clinton, who came for the Summit of the Americas. I traveled a great deal. It was a wonderful experience. And after that, I decided, and this is something Foreign Service officers do, to learn yet another language and explore a different culture and a part of the world. I went from there after a year of Russian training to Tashkent, Uzbekistan, part of the former Soviet Union, also a country that was emerging from being under communist dictatorship, lots of challenges. And I ran the International Visitor Leadership Program there too, and that was a great experience. And after 9/11, we had hundreds of journalists come because of the war in Afghanistan. I got to work with them. That was a great experience. The last part of my career was in Africa, and that came about because when I was in Washington on an assignment, I started working with fragile states. I spent time in Haiti. We worked on problems that were occurring in countries as diverse as Liberia and Zimbabwe to Sudan. And when I finished that tour, I decided I wanted to go to Sudan. I was fascinated by the country. I had previously been a deputy chief of mission in Kazakhstan after Uzbekistan, so I became the number 2 person in the embassy. And as a deputy chief of mission, I got to oversee the International Visitor Leadership Program, which at that point was run by the public affairs officer. It was a wonderful tour. I came back from that. I spent a year teaching public affairs at George Washington University on a fellowship from the State Department. I worked for an undersecretary after that who was promoting democracy and civilian security. And finally, I had the great honor of being nominated to be the U.S. ambassador to a tiny little country called Equatorial Guinea. Equatorial Guinea is unique for a number of reasons. It's unique in part because it is the only Spanish-speaking country in sub-Saharan Africa. So I got to practice my Spanish again, and as ambassador of a small embassy to oversee all of the functions in an embassy. Well, let me start about ambassadors, because sometimes people will say to me, gee, why do we have an ambassador in a country? I mean, what did you actually do? And when you're an ambassador, you are the personal representative of the president, but also of the U.S. government, and more broadly, of the people of the United States. As head of that diplomatic mission, you are there to interact, first of all, with the foreign government, usually with a foreign minister. But the most important thing that embassies do overseas is to assist and support Americans who visit those countries. And one of the most important parts when you're an ambassador of your embassy is the consular section. Now, the consular section within an embassy is there to help Americans, American citizen services, if they have children overseas, to register them, if they lose their passport, to help them with that, if they're visiting to do business. Now, those consular sections are in the capital city, but in large countries, for example, Brazil or China or other places, we have what are called consulates. The consulate is a branch of that embassy. It is still overseen by the ambassador, but the immediate person running that consulate will be a consul general. And that consul general is there to make sure where the focus is on helping people outside of the capital, again, on visas, Consular sections and consulates also issue visas to foreigners who want to visit the United States. Different sorts of visas. Some are tourist visas, some are business visas, some are special visas for government officials going to the United Nations. So you have the embassy that is run by the ambassador, then you have the consul generals running these branches. Within both the embassy and those consulates, as they're called, you're going to have political economic officers. They're going to be there reporting on what's happening, either in the capital or in those small cities. They're also going to be there if American business people come through to say, hey, what are the prospects for doing business here? What sort of laws does this country have? They're going to be there for that. So they are people who are gathering information primarily, but also can brief foreign business people when they come in. You have people in the management section, and those people run the nuts and bolts of an embassy. They're general service people, their personnel, their budget. You cannot run an embassy or a consulate without those folks. In some embassies, you will have what is called a U.S. aid mission, the U.S. Agency for International Development. And those people are working with the government, sometimes with NGOs, on a range of issues. It can be empowerment of women. It can be democracy. It can be entrepreneurship. But they are there as the arm of the U.S. government that is trying to help foreign countries. And they will have a U.S. aid director. The U.S. Agency for International Assistance Development is a separate agency from state, but it comes under state auspices. So you have those folks. You have sometimes military people who are there, defense attachés who are doing military-to-military cooperation. You have people sometimes from other law enforcement agencies, from the FBI or from DEA, and they're working with host country specialists, particularly these days on anti-terrorism, on fraud, on criminal activity, that we can help those countries with, and they can help us as well in terms of protecting our borders. So those are different parts. I've talked a little bit about what the public affairs section does. It is a section that is there to advise the ambassador on opportunities for outreach. So it will set up interviews for the ambassador. More and more public affairs sections are involved with social media. Someone within that section will be doing the tweets for the ambassador, putting things out. And on the cultural side, sometimes talking with the ambassador and saying, what kind of events would you like to see? Should we focus, say, on American dance or on American art? We have an opportunity to bring this exhibit. Is that something that will help you? Because often what the public affairs section does is it hosts receptions and it brings all sorts of people in from the host country, and that's good for the ambassador and for his entire staff because they can then meet a variety of people. So that's what public affairs officers do. They have the information side. I've talked a little bit about educational exchange. And these are places often that are very challenging for Americans. You have two different kinds of ambassadors. You have ambassadors who are political appointees, people who come out of various fields, who have worked with the current administration, and based on skills that they bring, perhaps in business or in the military or areas outside of foreign affairs, those people are direct representatives of the president as well. But once they become political appointees, they have to take off their political hat, their partisan political hat, because they're doing the same thing that the career people are doing. Whether you're a political ambassador, appointee, or you're a career person, You have to go through a Senate hearing. You have to answer questions. You have to go through a period of training to be an ambassador, to learn about different things. So you have this embassy, which is very hierarchical, as I've said, which has the ambassador, his deputy, and below him, the heads of the different sections. And all of those people meet in what is called a country team. The country team is there to advise the ambassador, and it represents all of these different interests within the embassy. But it's there at least once a week to sit down and talk about what's going on in the country. Now, I could not finish this discussion of what embassies do without talking about the role of our locally engaged employees. Talked about these Americans and all they do, but let me tell you, without locally engaged staff, it would be impossible. Let's talk a little bit about security for starters. We have someone who is head of a security section within an embassy. But that person has to have local employee staff who have good connections with the police, with security forces, because without that, we would not be able to function. Often we will have a local guard force. These will be people that we will hire from the country. And so those people often are the ones, before you get to those wonderful Marines in your embassy, they're on the outer perimeter, and they are working with the local government, and local government will have protection for embassies as well. So you have those people. On the administrative side, you have locally engaged staff who understand customs, they understand shipping, they understand all of these things that year in and year out an embassy needs to be able to function. And they're going to be there for 20, 30 years. Americans who come through on tours that range anywhere from 2 to 4 years. You have people in the political section, economic section, who have university degrees and are experts on those subjects. And those people help the Americans. So you have often dozens, if not hundreds, of local employed staff in an embassy. And those people are there, and they make our success overseas possible. And so I can't say too much about them in terms of their role within an embassy of assisting the Americans in every single function that I have talked about. We always have someone who is a local employee to be head of protocol. Protocol is very important in foreign culture. You need to get it right. When you send some sort of diplomatic note to the foreign government, you have to get all of the phrases right within that culture so you don't insult somebody. Or keeping your invitation list current, making sure you understand who has been sort of appointed or is dismissed within a foreign government. So all of those things are key, and they make working overseas a great pleasure. Representing your country, but it also is a challenge. And the last thing I would say about an American embassy is it is a team. And in some ways, those of us in the Foreign Service enjoy working overseas more than in Washington, because when you're overseas, you can be with people from different agencies, from the military, but we're all part of a team. We all represent the United States, and we put our affiliations aside often to pull together as a team. You go back to Washington, sometimes you get all the political rivalries. If you're with State Department, I'm with Defense Department, I'm with USAID. But overseas, you sit around that country team table, and I tell you, we sit down and we make decisions. As ambassador, I could not have done my work without the advice and the guidance of people on that team. So anyway, I loved every minute of it, but I'm very happy to be talking with you about international visitor leadership programs.